Without further ado, if you would, turn to John chapter 9. As we return to John chapter 9 for the third time, we are today concluding our sermon series entitled Seasons. And we saw that within John chapter 9 is the story of a man who has an encounter with Jesus. And we've seen that so far in this man's life, there are two distinct seasons that take place in John chapter 9. It starts with him in a season of darkness. And we discovered that there are some seasons in life that are longer than others. The season of darkness this man had lived through had been his entire life. But Jesus, the light of the world, was passing by one day and took the time to shine the light of life in the midst of this man's darkness. And the season of darkness came to an end. And it ushered in the second season, which we saw last week. It's the season of healing. And in the season of healing, what we discovered is that, man, there are some seasons that are long, but then there's other seasons that are very short. And in the moment, in just a blink, in the snap of a finger, all of a sudden, things shift in this man's life. And he went from a season of darkness now into a season of healing. And it's in the season of healing that we discovered that God desires to do three distinct things. And the first is to reveal himself unto us. The season of healing begins with the revelation of Jesus. But it doesn't stop there. Jesus reveals himself to us so that he can start working in us. And that's where we see Jesus spits into the dirt. In this prophetic picture, he spits into the dirt and he stirs it around until that dirt is saturated by his saliva, and the fountain of living water, Jesus, saturates the dirt of the ground, which was symbolic of man, and he wipes it on the man's eyes and then tells him, now go and to this pool and wash. Go to where I'm sending you and wash. And when the man did it, he came back healing. And we saw that the second thing Jesus wants to do is work in our life. Just like that saliva worked in the dirt, Jesus desires to work in us. But it doesn't stop there. The third thing that we discovered was that not only does Jesus reveal himself to us so that he can start working in us, but it's so that he can bring us to the point of being revealed through us to all of those around us. And it was there that when Jesus started to be revealed through the man, he had door after door, opportunity after opportunity to testify of what God had done in his life. And the greatest tool that we have been given, every single one of us has been given a testimony. That which Jesus has done in our life. People might not be able to understand, but they cannot deny a transformed life. And that is our great joy, to be able to participate in the revelation of Jesus Christ. And so it led to the concluding three questions. First, what are you seeing of Jesus in your life on a daily basis? And secondly, how has Jesus been touching your life? What has he been doing inside of you? Transforming you. And finally, who have you been telling about that work? Who have you been testifying about Jesus to? Because when you've truly experienced Jesus, when your eyes have been opened to see him, when you've had time in his presence, you cannot keep it to yourself. You've got to share, and you've got to testify to that which you have seen and heard. But what we're going to discover today is that so often in life, right on the heels of a season of breakthrough, right on the heels of a season of victory, right on the heels of a season of healing, there comes an unexpected season of fallout. The unexpected season, which we didn't see coming, that which we don't expect. And all of a sudden we find ourselves once again in the midst of an uncomfortable season. Jesus, I just had this encounter with you. Jesus, you're moving in my life. And Jesus, I thought it was going to look like this moving forward, but instead it looks very different. And I want to stop this morning and look at the third season in this man's life, the season of fallout. And as we look at this season, we come to discover that every single one of us, in some way, shape, or form, experiences the season of fallout. And what we're going to discover is that we're in very good company. So take heed, take joy, rejoice, and be at peace, even in the midst of a season of fallout, because you're in good company, we're going to discover. And so I want us to begin this morning by just keeping this in mind, that as Jesus was about to go to that cross and the seasons were about to change for not only him but for his disciples, he spoke one last thing to his disciples. He said, you know, boys, in the midst of all of this, these things for the last 3.5 years, everything that I've been speaking to you, all that I've been teaching you, all that I've been doing, I'm bringing it down to this. These things I've spoken to you so that in me you might have peace. God's desire is that you and I have peace. But what we discover is peace is not the result of external action or inaction. Peace is not external. Peace is a spiritual state. It's a fruit of the Spirit of God. And he said, I want you to have peace. And so I've spoken these words to you. Circumstances don't bring peace. The Word of God brings peace. And he says, I've spoken these words so that you might have peace. In the world, you're going to have tribulation. Jesus just puts it out there. He just owns it. And as we said in week 1, man, there are some seasons that we go through. It's not anybody's fault, but they're long and they're difficult seasons. And sometimes it's just the result of living in a fallen world. We live in the midst of a fallen world. In this world, Jesus said, you're going to have tribulation. But be of good cheer, because I've overcome the world. I've overcome the world. And I've spoken this to you one more time so that in me you might have peace and you might have joy. What we come to discover as we enter now into the season of fallout is that regardless of the season we are in, we've got to choose to rejoice. And we've got to choose to remain in his peace. So now looking at this third season, in John chapter 9, beginning now in verse 13, he has already had an encounter with Jesus. He went to the pool that Jesus sent him to. He washed, and he comes back, and his sight has been restored. And we discover, it says, they brought him who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. And now it was the Sabbath when Jesus had made the clay and opened his eyes. And the Pharisees, they asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, Jesus put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. And therefore, some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, no, how can this man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. Verse 17, and it says, and they said to the blind man again, what did he say to you? And what do you have to say about him? Because he opened your eyes. And the man who had been blind said, he's a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him, that he had actually been blind and actually received his sight, until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, is this your son, whom you say was born blind? How is it that he sees? And his parents answered them, and they said, we know this is our son, and we know he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we don't know. Or who opened his eyes, we don't know. He's of age, you ask him. He's of age, ask him. Verse 22. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. They said this out of fear, because they had heard that anybody that confessed Jesus as Christ was going to be kicked out of the synagogue. And therefore, verse 23, they said, he's of age, ask him. So they called again the man who was born blind, and they said to him, give God the glory. We know that this man's a sinner. And he answered them and he said, whether this man is a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I do know, that even though I was born blind, now I see. And they said to him again, well, what did he do to you? And how did he open your eyes? And he answered them again. He said, I told you already, and you don't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to be his disciples? And they reviled him. It says they reviled him, and they said, you're his disciple. We're Moses' disciples. We know God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he's from. And the man answered, and he said to them, well, this is just a marvelous thing. You're saying you don't know where he's from. You're saying he's a sinner, but now you're saying you don't know where he's from? We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but God listens to those who do his will. Verse 32. Since the beginning of the world, it's been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one that is born blind. If this man weren't from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. And they answered him and they said, you were completely born in sin. And it says, then they cast him out. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word this morning. And now, Lord, as we dive into it, I pray that you would make our hearts soft to hear your word, to receive it with joy and gladness. Open our ears to hear your voice, to hear and to listen, that we might be quick to do your word. Lord, open our eyes to see wonderful things from your scriptures. We ask this in Jesus' name, and we say, amen. As I said, when we look at the season of fallout, what often surprises us is that it comes so often in life right on the heels of a season of healing. It comes right on the heels of that season of victory. It often comes right on the heels of the season of breakthrough. The season of fallout often comes when we least expect it. We just had an encounter with God that we think is going to usher us into the next season of our life, and the next season is going to look, in our mind, a particular way, only to discover very quickly that it doesn't look anything like what we thought it was going to look like. This man had just had an encounter with Jesus. And yes, his circumstance changed. His eyes were open. He was healed. And right on the heels of this experience that he thought would bring about unity, that he thought nobody can deny this. Oftentimes what we discover is that in life, so often the experience that we have that we think no one can deny and that is going to unite people and people are going to come alongside of us and they're going to be just as joyful over what Christ did in my life as I am. Oftentimes we come to discover that that's not the case. And it's confusing. And let's be honest, it's hurtful. We just experienced God in a way that revolutionized and transformed our life, and we think that everybody is going to be just as excited about it as we are, only to discover that oftentimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's the total opposite. And that's what this man encounters. And right out of the gate in verse 16, we see that the first thing that happens in the season of fallout is division. That which should unite us so often divides us. And it says here that the Pharisees, they were divided amongst themselves. The people were divided amongst themselves. Well, this Jesus can't be of God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. And other people are saying, no, this guy's got to be of God because look at what he did. And it says there was division amongst them. So often in life, the season of fallout comes with division. And it's there in that season where we assumed that people will rally around us and be united and be as joyful as we are, that we come to discover that it's the complete opposite. And it's there in that season of fallout, it's there in the division that we have to remember that we're in good company. Because Jesus himself said in Matthew chapter 10, verse 34 and 30 through 36, he said, don't think that I came to actually bring peace the way you think of peace. I didn't come to bring the type of peace that you think I came to bring. I actually came to bring a sword. I came to divide. And the gospel that I bring, while it is life-giving, it is going to divide. It's going to divide soul and spirit. It's going to divide, Jesus actually said, families. Anybody ever had an encounter with Jesus that divided your family? You didn't think it was going to. Jesus touched your life, and all of a sudden, those that you thought would be the most happy over what Jesus did are those that maybe are the most confused, and it actually brings division. Jesus said, you're in good company. I came to bring that sword, and it's going to divide fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, in-laws against one another. The gospel of Jesus Christ brings healing to our spirit. But in this world, we're going to have tribulation. I'll never forget, after 6 years of living a prodigal life, living headlong into the world, I finally came back to Jesus. And it was the result of a radical encounter with Jesus that I could not deny. My life was changed. It was transformed. And I'll never forget that the friends that I had that were with me in the midst of all of the chaos and the craziness of the world, who had walked alongside me through all of these valleys, I thought these are the ones that are going to be the happiest over what God has done in my life. And they were the first ones that couldn't understand it. And it caused division. Jesus said, don't think that I came to bring peace. I came to bring a sword that divides. And what we have to understand is simply this. We cannot base our joy and our peace upon the opinions of others. Everybody's got an opinion. Just because you have one doesn't make it right. And just because somebody has an opinion doesn't mean you need it. You can't base your joy or your peace off other people's opinions. But we come to discover that right after he experiences this division, he also, in the season of fallout, experiences disbelief. Those that not only are divided on what happened, whether it's of God or whether it's not of God, there are going to be those in your life that flat out just don't believe that God actually touched your life. There are going to be those that just don't believe you. Even when faced with the reality of a transformed life, there were those that disbelieved, it says. Right here in verse 18. After there was a division amongst them, it goes on in verse 18 and it says, and the Jews didn't believe concerning him, whether he'd even been born blind, whether Jesus had actually even healed this man. There are always going to be those that choose to disbelieve. But once again, we come to discover when surrounded by disbelief, when surrounded by division, we are actually surrounded in good company. Because Jesus himself had family that didn't believe in him. And we see in John chapter 7, verse 5, that even Jesus had a few nagging little brothers that like to poke and prod, that like to disbelieve and said, Jesus, if you're really who you say you are, you wouldn't be claiming to do all of this and then hide yourself. Jesus, if you actually were doing these things, you'd be making yourself known. Jesus, if you actually were the Messiah, you'd be going to Jerusalem with us. Even his own brothers didn't believe Jesus. And so we come to discover that in the season of fallout, we can't base our joy or our peace on other people's belief. You can't base it on their opinion, and you can't base your joy and peace on whether or not they believe you. Your joy and your peace has to be anchored in Jesus. He experienced division. He experienced disbelief. But as if that wasn't bad enough, now it says that he experiences abandonment. They call his mom and dad onto the scene. This is a grown man, okay? He's a grown man who's been actively involved in the synagogue up till this point. He was probably about 40 years old, scholars believe, based on his interaction. And they call his parents and they say, "Was this your son? And was he really born blind?" They didn't believe it. And there was division amongst them. And even his parents abandoned him. Well, he's old enough, he can answer for himself. I'm not getting excommunicated because of him. I'm not getting kicked out because of what happened to him. I know he was born blind, and now he sees, and I can't explain it, but it comes with a cost. And I don't want to pay it. I'm happy for my boy, but I ain't paying for that ticket. And it says that even his parents abandoned him. They said, He's a grown man. He can answer for himself. He's on his own. We know him, but we ain't with him. But we discover that even those closest to Jesus abandoned him. It says in Matthew 26:56 and in Mark 14:50 that Jesus was abandoned by those closest to him. His disciples not only abandoned him, but they fled. They ran the other way from Jesus. And what we come to discover in the season of fallout is that we can't base our joy and we can't base our peace on whether or not people stay with us. There's going to be people in your life that walk alongside of you for a season. But when the seasons change, the people change. When the seasons change, sometimes the people change. And even the disciples fled from Jesus. This man's parents abandoned him. But we can't base our joy and our peace on who stays with us and who goes. You know, I'm 47 years old, and it's taken me 47 years to learn this lesson. I can't control anybody. I cannot control anyone. I can't control what you think. I can't control what you say. I can't control what you do, and I have no desire to try. Because it's taken me a lifetime to come to the point of realizing I can't control anybody. That means I can't control who stays, and I can't control who goes. And in my youth, man, I didn't understand this lesson. And there were some people that needed to go. And sometimes people leaving isn't always a bad thing. It's just a changing season. And you don't always know their season. And I tried to keep in my company some that it was time for them to go. And all it does is cause hurt and frustration. There's some that God brings in and some that God ushers out, and that's God's prerogative. But in the midst of a season of fallout, you can't base your joy and you can't base your peace on who stays with you and who goes. And don't be too quick to judge the situation, because you might just be surprised at who God brings back into your life. So don't try to hold on and don't try to control what isn't necessarily yours to control or hold. Let God bring and let God take. Let him be God. There was division, there was disbelief, there was abandonment. And as if that wasn't enough, We read on and we get to verse 28, and it actually says that after his parents abandon him, that the Pharisees and the Jews, they start piling it on. And it actually says, and they reviled him. Reviling is a word, we don't often use it in English anymore. But the connotation here, when it says that they reviled him, it literally means they heaped abuse upon him. They verbally abused the man. How many of you know the tongue is a wicked, wicked instrument? James says it's an unruly fire. And it's so easy to abuse others with something so small. And it says they reviled him. It literally means in Greek to heap abuse upon him. But what we can't afford to forget is simply this, that even Jesus was reviled. Even Jesus was reviled and spoken evil of by the priests and by the crowds. In Matthew 27, verse 39 and 41, it says that even as Jesus hung on the cross, in their place, in your place, in my place, even as Jesus hung there, they reviled him. They verbally abused him. And we can't base our joy and we can't base our peace on the lack of persecution. Did you hear me? We often think that if I'm not suffering any kind of abuse, if I'm not suffering any kind of persecution, well, that must be the blessing of God on my life. And then the minute persecution comes or reviling starts, somehow all of a sudden we wonder, where's God? And we thought, well, God, where's your blessing? God, where's your presence? God, why am I being reviled? Why am I being persecuted? Maybe we should start asking more, why am I not being persecuted for the gospel? Got real quiet in church there. But he says that all of a sudden they start reviling him. They start verbally abusing the man. And we can't base our joy and we can't base our peace on the lack of persecution that we may not be experiencing. Thinking that somehow that's what joy and peace is, or that's where it comes from, the lack of persecution. And as if reviling wasn't enough, as if the verbal abuse wasn't enough, it says in verse 34 that they began to slander the man. And notice they say, you were completely born in sins. You were completely born in sins. They start slandering the man. They weren't there when he was born. They don't know whether he was born in some sort of sinful state in the womb. But they start slandering him. Speaking evil against him falsely. But even Jesus was slandered. Even Jesus was slandered. And in John chapter 8, verse 48, we saw that these same Pharisees, these same leaders of the people that are now reviling and slandering this man that was healed are the same ones that turn around in chapter 8 and they start slandering Jesus, saying, aren't we right in saying that you're a Samaritan? Aren't we right in saying you're actually demon-possessed? They were slandering Jesus. Jesus wasn't a Samaritan and he wasn't demon-possessed. But they didn't have any problem slandering him. And oftentimes in the season of fallout, we start experiencing these exact same things. We experience division. We experience disbelief and abandonment. And we start experiencing reviling and slander spoken against us that, man, I didn't ask for this, Jesus. I thought that moving forward, man, I thought that after my encounter with you, I thought things were going to be good. I thought things were going to be easy. I thought people were going to be just as excited about you and what you did in my life as I am. And yet here I am, and all it seems like I'm going through is more stuff. And we allow this stuff to steal our joy and our peace. And finally, you get to the end of verse 34. After being slanderized, it says that they just utterly reject him. It says they cast him out. He wasn't politely asked not to return. He was given the left foot of fellowship right out the door. It says they rejected him, excommunicated him, wanted no fellowship moving forward with the man. Sometimes our encounter with Christ costs us more than what we expected. And in that moment, do we allow the cost of what we didn't expect? Do we allow the discomfort of what we are walking through in the flesh to actually rob us of the spiritual joy and the spiritual peace? Do we allow it to rob us of the spiritual life that Jesus came to give? We can't afford to forget this simple truth that when we're rejected by men, we're in good company because they rejected Jesus too. It says in John chapter 1, verse 11, that Jesus, he came to his own people, his own creation, his own kinsmen. He came to his own, and his own did not believe him, and they rejected him. In the midst of all of this, we can't base our joy and we can't base our peace off men's acceptance of us. We can't base our joy and our peace upon what men say about us. We've got to anchor our soul and hold on to our joy and our peace by remembering who Jesus is and what he has declared over us. And I love that the story doesn't end there in a season of fallout. What we come to discover is that even in the midst of a season of fallout, Jesus is nearby. My friends, no matter what season you are currently in, whether it feels like a season of darkness, Jesus is passing by. Whether you're in the season of healing, Jesus is right there in your midst, face to face with you. Or whether you are in a season of fallout and you feel completely abandoned, forsaken, forgotten, don't be dismayed. Because what we come to discover is that even in the season of fallout, Jesus is nearby. And it says in verse 34 that as they cast the man out, verse 35 comes. Jesus heard what happened. Jesus heard that they had cast the man out. Jesus heard about the division. He heard about the disbelief. He heard about the abandonment. He heard about the reviling. He heard about the slander. He heard about the rejection. And Jesus, when he heard, went and found the man. My friends, Jesus knows exactly who you are. He knows exactly where you are. He knows exactly his heart for you. He knows what he wants to do in your life. He knows everything you've done. He knows everything you're doing. He knows everything that you're going to do, and he still loves you. And he chooses again to find us. It says Jesus heard what happened to the man, and he found him. No matter who you are, no matter what season you're in, Jesus will find you. He's not far. He's not far. He's right there. And it says that he found the man, and he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" And the man answered and he said, "Who is he, Lord, so that I might believe in him?" And Jesus says to him, you've both seen him, and it's he who's talking to you now. You heard my voice before, but now your eyes are seeing me. I'm the one that you experienced just a moment ago, and I'm still here with you. And after everything that you've gone through, I'm never going to leave you, and I'm never going to forsake you. And I've spoken these words to you that you may have peace. In this world, you're going to have tribulation, but be of good cheer. Choose to rejoice, because I've overcome the world. And it says that the man, he cried out and said, Lord, I believe. Lord, I believe. And he worshiped. There's something about worship that brings us back to the center. There's something about Jesus that is worthy of our worship. And when we acknowledge that and we just simply lift up our voice in worship to him, he is centered and he is magnified. And when we turn back that breath that he put in our lungs back to him in worship, we will always find that he keeps his word, and he fills that breath with his presence. And in the presence of the Lord, there's joy. In the presence of the Lord, there's peace that passes all understanding. In the presence of the Lord, there is life, and life more abundant.